Hello, Gamergate. A side issue that's come up in discussions surrounding Gamergate is the issue of whether or not video games can be considered an art form. I get the impression that most people seem to take it for granted that yes they are, or no they are not. I'd like to take a moment of your time though to discuss this question in a little more detail. To answer it, I think the obvious first step is to answer the question of what is art? But that's not a simple question to answer. Let's start with the dictionary. According to this, art is the quality, production, expression, or realm, according to aesthetic principles, of what is beautiful, appealing, or of more than ordinary significance. I think that makes sense. So, for something to be considered art, it must either be beautiful, appealing, or have significance. So I think a fair way to rate something as art would be to consider its level of beauty and consider its level of meaning. By meaning here, I am talking about whether the piece of art contains significant meaning for you. Did it make you consider new things or consider old things in a different way? Did it change you as a person? Now, on the lower end of these scales, I have a category that I consider to not actually be art at all. These are things that are ugly and I find completely meaningless. A lot of modern art falls into this category for me. This is a painting I saw when I visited the Tate Modern Art Gallery in London. The description beside it read,
"My paintings have no titles because I do not wish them to be considered illustrations or pictorial puzzles,"
Still wrote.
"If properly made visible, they speak for themselves."
In a letter discussing this work, he explained that the red at the lower edge was intended to contrast with and therefore emphasize the depths of the blue. He saw the yellow wedge at the top as
a reassertion of the human context, a gesture of rejection of any authoritarian rationale or system of political dialectical dogma.
So, in my opinion, this painting is ugly and it has no personal significance to me. And therefore it is not art. If anyone still isn't following and thinks just because it's in an art gallery or just because it's on a canvas it's art, consider that if I had enough money, I could buy an art gallery, paint a stick figure on a canvas, hang it, and call it art and myself an artist. All of that, though, would not, in my opinion, qualify my painting as art. So, my second category is pieces of art that have some level of beauty and or meaning, but do not really excel at either. Here's an example of what I would put in this category. Okay? And the third category is pieces of art that are very beautiful, but not particularly meaningful, very meaningful, but not particularly beautiful, or somewhere in between. And the fourth and last category would be something that is both very beautiful and very meaningful. This is what I would consider to be great art. Now, you may have disagreed with some or all of my examples here, and that's a very important point because beauty and meaning are both completely subjective. That means the same piece of art might fall into different categories for different people. Note this also means that something that is art for one person might not be art for another. This is why I think critics cannot or should not be the deciding factor in determining the artistic merit, or lack thereof, of a particular piece of art. Allowing that is just allowing one person's subjective opinion to outweigh other people's. Critics can talk about technical aspects of a piece of art, but no person can claim a monopoly on being able to interpret meaning and beauty. Now, let's apply this scale to video games and see what happens. I think there are probably plenty of games that fall into the not art category. They're not particularly beautiful, and when you play them, they don't make you think of anything new. They're not meaningful. I think we can all think of a lot of games that fit into this category. The second category is where I think most video games fall though, and I think they mostly end up in the moderately beautiful but not particularly meaningful category of quote-unquote bad art. Overall, I'd say the vast majority of video games can be placed somewhere in this circle. That's not to say there aren't some very beautiful or very meaningful games, but I think those are the exception rather than the rule. I would also say that there are no video games that could really be put into the great art category with something like Michelangelo's David. Now, you may disagree with me on that, which of course is entirely your right. Now, before we can go further, we have to talk about something that makes video games different from many traditional forms of art, like painting, and that is the game component. Unlike a painting, video games have rules, winning and losing, and can be measured on the scale of how fun it is. Now, before you go thinking that a game being fun makes it meaningful and thus it is art, think about chess. Chess has rules, it's interactive, and for those who like it, it's very fun. Yet chess is universally put in the category of not art. That's because fun and meaning are not the same thing. Art is not measured by how much enjoyment someone gets from it. So if we're judging whether or not video games are art, you have to throw out the whole game aspect of it. So now I think we're ready to answer the question. Are video games art? I say yes. Critics argue that video games are not art because there have been no games that are as beautiful as the great paintings, sculptures, and cathedrals. They say that video games are not art because no game is as meaningful as the great novels, films, and poems. To those people, I say, not yet. Video games are still in their infancy when compared to almost every other form of art. As technology improves, the ability for video game environments to be incredibly beautiful will only increase. As for meaning, the story and dialogue of video games is limited only by the people writing and producing the game. If video games are accepted as art, over time the most talented writers, instead of writing books or screenplays, might start writing video games. Then you'll see some incredible works of art take the form of video games. In fact, video games have the potential to surpass all other art forms, because if a game manages to take the form of great art, you won't just be looking at it, watching it, or reading it. You'll be totally immersed in it. You'll be interacting with it. Imagine being inside your favorite painting as it's changing over time, or taking an active part in the plot of your favorite novel. That's what video games could be. And that's one of the reasons Gamergate is so important. I feel that modern art criticism and art theory has all but ruined pretty much every other form of art. When is the last truly great painting produced? When is the last truly great novel written? Does it seem to you that most of the best works of art were created long before any of us were born? That's because modern art criticism and art theory say that stuff like this belongs in an art gallery. Supporters of Gamergate do not want the video game equivalent of this painting to be considered a great game. So to the critics I say, are video games great art? No, not yet. Are they art though? Yeah, most of them. Whether or not something is art is not limited by whether or not a sufficient number of great works has been produced. At the end of the day, if you're someone who thinks that video games are never beautiful and never meaningful, then you simply haven't played enough games. So, my question to you is this. Do you agree with my take on this? Are video games art in your opinion? And is considering video games to be art even a good thing? Are you afraid of what modern art theory and criticism might do to video games if it gets the claws into it? So let me know in the comments, and go ahead and like, dislike, share, or subscribe as you see fit. And I wish you all the best.